Waterloo, 1815. One of the most decisive battles in history, and one of the bloodiest. Napoleon's final bid for glory as the Emperor of France. Destroyed at the hands of Wellington and the Allies. But what happened after the fighting, when the guns stopped firing and darkness fell across the battlefield? What happened to the Waterloo dead? The battle took a single day. By evening on June the 18th, 1815, more than 50,000 men lay dead or wounded. French, Prussians, Dutch Belgians, Hanoverians, British. Too often the memory of the battle is blurred by its iconography. Emperors, eagles, glory. Unlike the wars of the 20th century, or of today, very few of those killed were memorialised. Usually just officers, or a few celebrated individuals. Most of the dead have never been found. No mass graves on the battlefield ever discovered. Tim Sutherland is known for his work on the medieval period, but he specialises in battlefield archaeology. And Waterloo is one of the most well-known battlefields of all.
So Waterloo's possibly one of the most famous battles in European history, and it led to some extent, it led to the formulation of the Europe that we would recognise today.
It was through his work researching the battlefield of Agincourt that Tim discovered the character who would spark his interest in Waterloo. The 19th century antiquarian, John George Woodford. Woodford had excavated a mass grave at Agincourt in 1818, making him perhaps the first known battlefield archaeologist. But also among his papers were records from his own experience of battle just a few years previously. Tim found that Woodford had served as a British Army officer in the Napoleonic Wars, which culminated in 1815 when Bonaparte escaped from exile on the Isle of Elba and returned to take on once more the European powers. The campaign became known as the 100 Days. The veteran French soldiers flocked back to their eagle standards, and Napoleon launched his reformed Grande Armée in a lightning bid to capture Belgium and the Low Countries. Standing in his way were the Allied British and Prussian armies. Falling back, they fought off Napoleon at Quatre Bras and Ligny before bringing their armies together to stop him once and for all. The British and Allied commander, the Duke of Wellington, chose his position defending a shallow valley astride the main road a few miles south of Brussels. Woodford, a lieutenant colonel, was a staff officer during the campaign. One of his jobs would have been to carry dispatches between his division and the commander-in-chief. Wellington's headquarters before the battle were here in the nearest town, Waterloo.
I'm now walking in John George Woodford's steps yet again. Here we are at the command centre of the whole of the British Army. Wellington's sitting at his desk. Woodford walks in, hands Wellington a dispatch. "What's your reply, sir?" Wellington would have said, "I'm sorry, there's no time for a reply. The French have cut the road. You're not going to go back. You are going to join me as an aide. And not only that, but we're about to move off onto the battlefield."
All day, Wellington's 68,000 men held out against repeated attacks from Napoleon's 73,000. Finally, in the early evening, the French Imperial Guard, the most feared troops in the world, were defeated, and with them, their emperor. One of the first things Woodford did after the battle was write to his brother Alexander, also at Waterloo. One of the officers who commanded the defence of Hougoumont, the vitally important farm and chateau where British and Allied troops held out against overwhelming odds. At the time of his death in 1879, John George Woodford was said to be the last surviving British officer from Waterloo. In 2013, the 200th anniversary of Waterloo was still 2 years away. This would be an important landmark in European history, yet little archaeological research had ever been done there.
I'd heard a lot about what was happening at Waterloo, and with the anniversary coming up, I thought it's important that somebody actually acknowledges the fact that there is battlefield archaeology.
The battlefield is relatively untouched. Apart from the Great Earth Monument built in the 1840s, the Lion Mound, it's still mostly open farmland, just the same as in 1815. But one famous part of the battlefield had changed over the years. In fact, it had almost crumbled away. Hougoumont. At least 600 men are thought to have died in the fighting here. The farm and buildings had always been one of the most evocative parts of the battlefield to visitors. They seemed hardly to have changed since 1815, but by the early 21st century they'd fallen into disrepair, and with the passing of the last tenant farmer, had become virtually derelict. It was alarming enough to cause a group of people to take action. Project Hougoumont was formed to protect, preserve, and hopefully restore the site.
There was a lot of talk about renovation at Hougoumont Farm, in that they wanted to put it back into a stable condition, but nobody was talking about the archaeology of the farm at the time.
Project Hougoumont faced a challenging enough schedule to have the site ready in time for the bicentenary. But the proposal of an initial archaeological survey helped with their remit to broaden the understanding of the site, and was approved. Tim and his team from the University of York prepared to go from medieval to Napoleonic and headed to Waterloo. When they got there, they were taken aback at how quickly things were moving.
When I arrived on site, it was evident there was huge amounts of activity. There were people rebuilding things, there was new roofs going on, new windows, etc. But it was alarming that there was no archaeological work apparent on the site at all. One of the problems is that it's a huge piece of land, and so what we thought we'd better do is target specific areas, analyse those in detail, hopefully get some more information and work our way forwards from that point.
The team used a variety of remote sensing methods. Geophysics specialist Helen Goodchild uses magnetometry and earth resistance in selected areas to sample the ground conditions. It's never been attempted here before, so no one has any idea if it will reveal archaeology from the battle in 1815 or the entire time frame of the site's occupation. This area was an ornamental garden. Surviving accounts describe the area at the end of the battle, littered with the bodies of dead soldiers. It's possible traces of the original features might remain. The team also use another technique, one that helps encompass wide areas of the large site quickly. With so much development going on, there's no knowing what might change by the time they're able to return. They need to capture large amounts of data quickly.
Photogrammetry is an important tool because it uses, for example, a series of images you can glue together to produce something like a 3D image. So, for example, we wanted to record parts of the farm buildings. We wanted to record the gardens and the walls around the gardens.
One question regarding Hougoumont story is what happened to the hundreds of dead known to have been left here after the fighting. Yet there are clues. After the battle, many artists travelled to Waterloo, some within a few weeks or even days. Some of them sketched the area around Hougoumont, and so these might be a useful source of information for archaeology.
Old prints and images are a fantastic and useful source of information, especially when it relates to human remains and bodies. We can see people burying the bodies after the battle.
Sketches and prints show disposal of the dead outside Hougoumont gates. At the south gate, a burial pit perhaps. At the north gate, possible evidence that bodies were cremated. The team tried ground-penetrating radar over the south gate area in the hope of detecting traces of a pit. The problem is there's so much overburden that it's difficult for the radar to see through. But the north gate area hasn't been built over. Various prints show ashes and human remains in an area outside the gate and near the mouth of the Hollow Way, a sunken track used as a supply route to Hougoumont during the battle, still just visible.
What we're looking for is any trace of burning that would have taken place on site. It's really difficult to get rid of, to burn human remains completely. And so there's almost certainly going to be some evidence in the landscape somewhere of those burnt human remains.
After just a day's surveying here, the MAG is showing results.
Basically, because we've got these extremes of the dark and the light, that's showing that it's really, really magnetic here. Whether that's some sort of ditch that's been filled with material that's either decomposing or reacting in some chemical way to make it more magnetic.
The data from the first ever survey of its kind at Hougoumont is encouraging. The geophysics show traces of the ornamental garden, unseen for at least a century, perhaps more. The photogrammetry has captured a high-resolution digital snapshot of Hougoumont partway through the restoration, covering the garden and buildings and the entire perimeter of the wall held by Wellington's troops, all before traces of the battle are removed forever by building work. It's the North Gate data that's most compelling. Areas that could be organic deposits, tree boles perhaps, or areas where something has been burned.
One thing that's evident from this survey is that just outside the North Gate there's been an extensive amount of burning. We don't know when this burning dates to. It could relate to the few days after the battle when in and around some of these areas there were huge numbers of people that were burnt in large pits. Overall, I was really happy with the initial results, but of course they were very limited. We needed to get back out there and get some really good results over a much larger area.
After seeing the initial geophysics results in June 2014, Project Hougoumont UK commissioned further work to widen the survey. But it's winter by the time the permissions are in place, the survey team are available, and the work can go ahead. From the moment Tim arrives, he sees there have been huge changes. Spurred on by the June 2015 deadline, hardly any part of the site has escaped some form of renovation work, including some of the areas covered by the initial survey the previous spring. At least the photogrammetry captured some details before they changed.
When I returned, it was slightly disappointing to be able to see extensive digging over the whole of the site. There were trenches going in for pipes, there were big holes in the ground for septic tanks and sewerage systems, and also the buildings had been rendered and painted.
The survey has been carried out for Project Hougoumont UK, but it's seen as a commercial venture by the Belgian authorities, and therefore permission to dig isn't granted. At the North Gate, the very site Tim wants to investigate the possible cremation area but isn't allowed to, developers aren't bound by the same restrictions as archaeologists.
It's quite frustrating in that there's huge amounts of ground disturbance that's been undertaken, including very large pits that have been dug for soakaways and drains, and they don't need any permissions to disturb the ground. So they can dig what they want without recording anything, and that's the nature of building. But unfortunately, we're not allowed to come in and record this as it is, or disturb any ground. Which seems a bit strange really, because we're hopefully digging to record and preserve and protect. And all the topsoil that was here that's probably never really been disturbed in the last 200 years or so. Anything that was fought over and dropped on this ground has now been disturbed, and it's been moved around. Some of it's been put back roughly where it was, but some of it's just been moved around, and some of it, because they've actually excavated large holes and then put something back into the holes, such as the soakaways, they've got too much soil, so they have to take that soil away somewhere else. Now that soil and the material it contained is now somewhere else. Now what it contained we'll never ever know, because it's gone.
Nevertheless, the team press on. The idea is to extend the survey around the grounds and buildings. To cover a wider area, they've brought new equipment to trial for the first time in the field. It's a specially built vehicle for the magnetometer array, fully non-ferrous so as not to affect the signal. But even this is heavy going after a few hours in torrential rain, just like the weather soldiers on both sides had to endure the night before the battle. Surveyor Graham Atwood's ancestor was here and survived.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to be doing a survey over an area where, my ancestor fought in the battle, in the reserves initially, and then in the sort of final advance. Just to see the landscapes that he'd have seen and experienced during those sort of momentous few days. Yes, it's really interesting.
Dominic Bosquet and Didier Willems are two of the archaeological officers for the Waterloo area. Inside Hougoumant's courtyard, Didier is recording the footprint of the destroyed chateau, revealed where the surface cobbles have been removed for levelling.
In the context of Hougoumont restoration, we have to follow the different excavations. And especially here in the center of the site, in fact in the place of the old main house of Hougoumont.
Despite the disruption caused by developers at the North Gate, Tim's not giving up. He and Dominic Bosquet look at soil samples from across the area. The samples reveal a widespread layer of burnt material. This could be from general waste disposal on the farm, but it seems likely that it's also the remnants of what went on after the battle. Burnt timbers from the chateau and buildings, and possibly the disposal of the dead.
We need to go one meter
I would have thought
deep
so.
and maybe more.
Despite the difficult conditions, the surveys revealed more detail about the site. Tim has been able to verify field boundaries, and from them which historic maps are accurate. He's also found trackways through the now vanished wood of Hougoumont, and another across the entire site, perhaps earlier than the farm itself. There are also more heavily magnetic anomalies that could indicate other areas of burning. One characteristic dominates the data. All areas show a dense covering of ferrous metal, fragments of iron and steel, a reminder of what happened in these fields 200 years ago. It's not only Hougoumont that's seen extensive building work in the run-up to 2015. Massive redevelopment elsewhere on the battlefield has brought huge amounts of earth moving. Yet even so, hardly any archaeology relating to the battle has been found. Just one skeleton, buried alone, not in a mass grave of the kind Tim's been looking for. Dominic Bosquet oversaw the excavation.
They moved the car park for the bicentenary. They put it along the highway, and we've done test trenches on 10% of the total surface of the parking, and we found a body in one of the trenches. We opened 130 trenches, 2 meters wide, 10 meters long, and we found, well, I was very surprised to find only one.
And that was the one with the bullet in his chest?
Yeah.
The round shot in
That's
his chest?
the one, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
The skeleton has been identified as probably that of an Allied Hanoverian soldier, probably an infantryman. As Wellington famously put it, the only thing worse than a battle lost was a battle won. And for the British and Allied victors at Waterloo, It was a new experience to find themselves still present among the carnage of their victory. At this time, a victorious army usually moved off in pursuit of its defeated enemy. Only rarely did it remain where it had fought. After Waterloo, the pursuit of the broken Grande Armée was left to the vengeful Prussians. Many survivors wrote about their experiences after the battle. Most, even veterans, had never seen a battle so intense, nor with so many casualties. One was Captain Mercer of the British Royal Horse Artillery. Author Paul O'Keefe has researched extensively this period after the fighting, the moment many historians turn the page and move on to later events. For many thousands of men on the evening of June the 18th, 1815, the story of the battle now became one of shock, bewilderment, fear, and agony. Mercer's battery of guns, G Troop, spent the climactic hours of the battle on the lip of the British and Allied ridge. From here they fired at the French cavalry attacking them up the hill, often at point-blank range. By evening, they were exhausted.
At the end of the battle, G Troop was in an appalling tangle. The guns had been recoiled, pushed forward, fired, recoiled, pushed forward, fired, until his men did not have the strength to push forward the guns again. And that was when the battle finished. And just over there, in front of Mercer's now immobilised guns, was a pile of corpses. It could be seen from Napoleon's lines on the other side of the valley. Mercer's guns had practically altered the topography of the field. At midnight, when the exhausted Mercer woke up, he looked out over a moonlit landscape of carnage. It was rendered almost perversely beautiful by the silvered moonlight. He described a landscape of slaughter, and here and there, all over the battlefield, pencils of light reflecting from the moon's beams from cap badges, cuirasses, discarded weapons. So the entire scene of slaughter in the darkness glistened and twinkled in the moonlight. And here and there he could see men struggling to bind up their wounds, occasionally trying to get up and then falling exhausted back to bleed to death. And what made the scene even more eerie was that for Mercer, it was entirely silent. His eardrums had been hammered to deafness by 10 solid hours of artillery fire. So although he could see everything, the spectacle was of total silence.
Mercer's memoir contains a record of perhaps one of the first burials among the guns of his battery on the ridge.
He left an account of waking up on the morning after the battle, and the first person to come to him is one of his men, and he says, "Permission to bury Driver Crammond, sir." And Mercer says, "Well, why Driver Crammond specifically?" And the reply is, "Because he looks so frightful, sir. The men have not had a wink of sleep for him." And Driver Crammond had been hit by a round shot which had taken away most of his head, but left his face still attached to the ragged remains of his neck. And the eyes of Driver Crammond had so spooked Mercer's men that they'd been unable to sleep all night. Mercer's crew just couldn't sleep for the sight of this absolutely appalling sight. And it's almost as if in microcosm that stands for all the other ghastly sights of the battle.
All across the battlefield that morning, the survivors took in the scale of the previous day's slaughter.
Veterans were saying they had never seen anything like this battlefield. The Battle of Leipzig was a much, much bigger battle, but it was fought over an area of about 20 miles over 3 days.
So we're talking about something that's really condensed.
Congested slaughter. This is the actual field of battle. The action took place over 5 square miles.
Which is very small, really.
Very, very small. 5 square miles and upwards of 53,000 dead and wounded at the end of it all.
Through his work on medieval sites, Tim has identified an archaeological sequence as battlefields were steadily cleared and the dead buried. Could this model be similar to what happened in the aftermath of Waterloo?
One thing we seem to have in a medieval context is that we have the battle, and then there is almost an obligation for the king or the leader of the victorious army to hold the field for at least one night, a couple of days or whatever. Presumably that's so that the arms can be picked up, their own wounded can be dealt with, and anything valuable can be removed. And then of course that army moves on and the field is left to anybody else that comes along afterwards. And then over the next few days, weeks, months, there is the sort of obligation for somebody, usually somebody religious, to come and clear the battlefield. So they put the dead either in graves or in pits and then bury them.
The burials were undertaken by the peasantry who were conscripted. We have accounts of the peasantry being conscripted by Prussians at bayonet point.
Right.
They had to persuade them to bury the dead.
It was a huge task. The human bodies could at least be moved by carts or barrows. But it wasn't just dead humans that had to be dealt with. The sheer mass of dead horses presented formidable problems.
Remember, obviously, we're talking about hundreds, thousands of horses, potentially. And all this has got to go somewhere. Something's got to happen to it, because it's not there now.
7,000 horses, apparently.
That's a large number.
About 7,000 horses. Dead and maimed. The maimed horses, a great danger to the injured. They tried burying the horses. And if you can imagine a grave pit, you'd need a huge grave pit to bury
7,000 horses?
7,000
You need a
horses.
quarry, basically.
Yeah, you'd need a quarry. There was no quarry. So they started burying the horses. By about day 3 or day 4, they've given up on burying the horses, so they start burning them. Similarly, they were also burying the human dead. Now, what would normally happen, and which happened at Waterloo, was the bodies would be stripped naked, and all the valuables would be taken either by the local peasantry or by the survivors of the battle. A lot of the looters were British soldiers.
Of course, there were people around the periphery of the battlefield almost pillaging as the battle's still taking place, including soldiers and hangers-on.
There's a famous account of when General Picton was shot from his horse. He'd no sooner hit the ground than one of his own men was rifling through his pockets, grabbing his spectacles and his watch.
The burning hot June sun brought another urgency.
It was the logistics of the slaughter that created this urgency. They had to get rid of a vast number of human bodies fast before before they exploded in the heat. Within about a week, they realised they weren't burying them fast enough, so they started burning them. For some time, they'd have bonfires of horse corpses and human bonfires. Towards the end, there was no distinction. They'd just throw the human bodies onto the piles of burning horses.
And archaeologically, this is what we are looking for. We are looking for evidence of all these different phases. There must be individual burials, multiple burials, and then part burials, part burning, and then just pits full of burning people and horses.
Yeah.
This is an industrial process of getting rid of
Yes.
thousands of bodies.
Paul has also found accounts relating to the disposal of the dead at Hougoumont, perhaps in the same areas where Tim has been surveying.
So there was an account at Hougoumont of a large number of French dead that were first placed in a burial pit. This burial pit was so congested and so full that it actually overflowed. And then they laid wood on top and set fire to it, which, when you think about it, it's
the wrong way around.
It's the wrong way around. And what you had was the top part of the pile was reduced to ashes, but down below was all this cooked flesh. It would just be like a great earth oven below
And
the
of course,
fire.
it wouldn't do the job properly.
No,
because
of course not.
ideally you want to burn basically the fat of the animals and the people, and that burns, turns it into a proper cremation.
Horrific though the sights on the battlefield must have been, they didn't prevent the next phase of the aftermath. In fact, in many ways, they encouraged it. La Belle Alliance was an inn on the main Brussels road, Napoleon's command position during the battle. By evening it was clogged with traffic and debris as the survivors tried their best to escape. In the days after the battle, La Belle Alliance became a magnet for another wave of incomers. Tourists.
There was one group, they called themselves the Brentford Lads. They'd come over from London and they'd heard about the stench of the battlefield, so they armed themselves with snuff and they took onto the battlefield on the day they visited from Brussels 2 pints of brandy just to get them round the field. They, of course, went to La Belle Alliance and they had a meal there. They didn't like the food. They said that the bacon was yellow and rancid, and one of them suspected it had been actually cut off dead bodies. They were very, very thrilled as the harvesters went through the cornfield to find a severed leg looking very fresh still. They also found, sticking out of one of the burial mounds, a decaying hand. And they assumed it was a Frenchman's hand. And they took 2 fingers off and took them back to London, pickled in spirits.
There were others too for whom the presence of dead bodies was an incentive to visit the battlefield. Liverpool's Victoria Gallery and Museum has a collection relating to Waterloo. But its most unique artefacts aren't the usual trappings of battle. Even into the 20th century, dentures were sometimes known as Waterloo teeth. But it wasn't just a nickname. The dentures in this collection are made from real teeth, from the skulls of real soldiers dead in the mud at Waterloo. 1815 wasn't the first time this happened. Through his research, Paul has explored the truth behind this legend.
Teeth had been collected from battlefields for many years before Waterloo. It was said that at Leipzig, when all the Prussian soldiers that were killed there were straight out of military academy, and the French were all raw levies, and they hadn't got old enough to stain their teeth with tobacco. And this was the great harvest of Leipzig. That was 1813.
The rise in interest in medical science in the early 1800s led to a steady demand for cadavers for dissection. But also as sugar became more common, there was an even greater demand for teeth.
These men were body snatchers, resurrection men, come over from England following the Allied armies, Wellington's armies across the peninsula. There's a story of a man encountered on the borders between Spain and France in 1814, and he said to a surgeon, "Oh sir," he said, "let there just be a battle, and then we shall have no want of teeth. I'll pull them as soon as they're knocked down."
In 1815, the tooth collectors were waiting in the wings for just such a battle.
Immediately after a battle, they would go in and they would just pull teeth. They would collect teeth, take them back to London, sell them to dentists. The dentist would then put these real teeth into plates of ivory, hippopotamus ivory, walrus ivory, elephant ivory. They only took the incisors and the canines, only the bits of the teeth that showed when you spoke.
Even in the American Civil War in the 1860s, when teeth were still being drawn and used for dentures in England, they were still known as Waterloo teeth. Yet there's hardly any documentary evidence for the practice having happened at Waterloo. Paul has tracked down the only record.
There is only one account, documentary account, of the taking of teeth from the battlefield of Waterloo. And this is an officer who, a couple of days after the battle, was riding past a mass grave. On the side of the mass grave, piles of naked bodies. And all he heard at first was the clink of metal on metal, of a small hammer on a small chisel. And he noticed a group of what he described in the casual anti-Semitism of the time as a group of Russian Jews chiseling out the front teeth of the bodies before they were thrown into the grave. All he heard was the clink, clink, clink of hammer on little chisel.
June 2015, and a lot has happened since Tim was last here. The restoration was completed in time for the 200th anniversary.
Oh, Paul.
Tim!
Nice to see you again.
So far, none of the archaeological surveys has revealed the exact locations of cremation or grave areas around Hougoumont. But could some of Paul's documentary research help?
Over the last couple of years, what we've been doing is been looking at the archaeological evidence of where the potential burials were. We know that potentially there were some near the North Gate and there were some outside the South Gate. All the evidence is not conclusive, and so what I was wondering is there any historical evidence that you've been looking at that will take us further, the next step on?
Well, there are quite a lot of accounts of tourists visiting Hougoumont, but there are two I can think of that actually talk about the graves and the burning of the bodies in Hougoumont, and they possibly give us a clue as to whereabouts in the Hougoumont estate this happened.
So this is tangible evidence that they're looking at that time.
Yes.
Do we have any clue about where these pits were or where this evidence was?
While Hougomont's chapel is virtually unchanged since 1815, the adjoining chateau burned to the ground, leaving the courtyard open as it is today. Beyond, on the north side of the enclosure, there were outbuildings which were badly damaged during the battle. So much so that they were pulled down in the weeks or months afterwards. Retracing the Reverend Rudge's steps, Tim and Paul try to recreate what he saw.
One source is a Reverend Mr. Rudge who visited the field of Waterloo a few days after the battle.
Right.
Okay? He visited Hougoumont, and he says, in one of the outbuildings, of which the roof and wall were nearly destroyed, was a large room in which the bodies of some hundreds had been burnt. And he says that their ashes yet smoked. And I am sure I speak without exaggeration when I say that the ashes of the dead were in this place 3 feet deep. So there's 3 feet of ash in a large room in this ruined outbuilding.
Semi-demolished building.
Yes.
Yeah. We know that the outbuildings that were destroyed was the main barn and those two buildings along the eastern wall of the chateau. Now, obviously, the main barn has been renovated, as we can see it now. It's all back to normal, and as far as we know, they never found any human remains in the footings of those.
Right. Okay. Well, the second source is from Robert Southey's journal. He arrived at Hougoumont from La Belle Alliance with his party, one of whom was a Mr. Nash, an artist. Mr. Nash made a first sketch just to the left of the gate, and he made a sketch of the chapel.
Yes.
His second sketch was probably from about where we're standing now.
Okay.
And he made a second sketch from the door of the chapel,
Okay.
comprising the interior of the ruins. So presumably the interior of the ruins is what we're this empty space we're
We've got
looking
the
at.
chateau in front of us, and
Yes.
we've got the ruined buildings of the whole farm in front of us now. That suggests that this is actually inside the courtyard.
Yeah.
Now, everybody else has been looking outside the courtyard, and this is a significant historical document. The way we look at it now, we've got our back to the chapel. If we look down, there's only one way to look, basically, through the ruins of the chateau itself and down onto the ruins of the barns, in which case that suggests that somewhere in that corner is where they've been burning the dead and potentially burying them. And of course, that's where there is nothing now.
No.
There is just a blank open courtyard.
Could this explain why the outbuildings were never rebuilt? For years afterwards, it may have been remembered as an area where bodies were burned. Perhaps even why, decades later, trees were planted here, inside the courtyard.
Now we end up with a completely different interpretation to that which we started out with. After 18 months, 2 years of quite thorough archaeological investigation, we've now got somewhere significantly interesting that potentially I'm standing on the site of where they might have burnt the bodies. And in terms of where we started off, I think this is fantastic because it's got us somewhere, and it does look now as if this is the place where some of the bodies were burnt within this derelict building just after the Battle of Waterloo.
The only way to tell for sure will be through archaeology.
I think the interesting thing about archaeology is that you have to apply the process, and it leads you hopefully to new ground, and it might not be me that gets to dig it, which can be quite frustrating, but that's what archaeology is all about. It might not be us that does the final bit of the work.
Wellington regarded the holding of Hougoumont as the single most important act in winning the Battle of Waterloo. The victory brought about the end of Napoleon and almost 25 years of constant war. The remains of the men killed during this act possibly still lie within a few yards of where they died.